European Theatre of Operations, January 1944. A craggy valley near Cassino, Italy. The air was thick, not just with the bone-chilling mist that clung to the Apennine foothills, but with the suffocating certainty of stalemate. Below, the ancient monastery of Monte Cassino sat like a granite sentinel, mocking the Allied advance. Above, the sky was silent, but the ground vibrated with the slow, methodical horror of the Gustav Line. This, however, was not the main front. This was the vulnerable rear, the long, convoluted spinal cord of the Fifth Army's supply. Our story begins far from the roar of heavy artillery, in a supposedly secure engineering depot vital to maintaining the narrow roads snaking up to the lines. The time, 02 hours. The place, a freshly built Bailey Bridge over a minor nameless tributary designated only as Site Delta 9. A U.S. Army Engineering Corps patrol, exhausted and mud-caked, approached the bridge. Their headlights cut through the fog, illuminating a silhouette. A figure in a pristine GI uniform, helmet angled just wrong, inspecting the bridge's load-bearing trusses. He looked like an American engineer. He sounded like an American engineer when he called out in a nasal, unremarkable accent, "Everything secure, sirs. Just routine checkup. Span's good for a tank column, provided the weather holds." The men of the Fifth Army were fighting a war of attrition, focused on the enemy they could see, the hardened German paratroopers on the high ground. What they could not see was the enemy they trusted, the men who looked like them, spoke their language, and wore their uniform. This was the chilling irony of the winter of 1944. As the Allies struggled to push north against Hitler's granite defenses, a quieter, more insidious war of sabotage had begun behind their own lines, a psychological poison designed to breed paranoia and paralysis. The enemy, born not in Berlin but in the shadow of the Italian Social Republic, were part of a newly formed Battaglione d'Assalto, trained by German intelligence in the brutal arts of deception and disruption. Their mission: cripple the logistics of the advancing U.S. forces, specifically targeting the complex network of temporary roads, field hospitals, and, most critically, the bridges that kept the blood of supply flowing. Sergeant Frank "Mac" McMillan, a logistics specialist from Boston, was among the first to notice the subtle discord. His focus wasn't on the enemy's uniform, but on their behavior. Engineers, Mac knew, swore by coffee, cigarettes, and constant furious cursing. These engineers were too neat, too polite. Their gear was immaculate, their slang just slightly outdated. We had intelligence reports about specialized units, Italian fascists, not regular Wehrmacht, who were fanatical about stopping the invasion. They weren't fighting for land. They were fighting for Mussolini's ghost. Their training focused on blending in, on becoming ghosts in the machine. Their biggest advantage wasn't their disguise. It was our own American arrogance. We thought we were the only ones who knew how to be Americans. Source: OSS Report, Naples Field Office, January 1944. The Infiltrators' technique was masterful in its simplicity. They weren't attempting grand explosive acts of destruction. They were executing micro-sabotage, filing down critical threads on stress bolts, contaminating fuel dumps with traces of seawater, and, their most damaging tactic, subtly misdirecting convoys carrying essential ammunition. They drove U.S. Army jeeps, captured and repainted, flashed genuine-looking, albeit slightly smudged ID tags, and used a pre-approved list of American jargon. Within 3 days, 2 vital columns of M4 Sherman medium tanks had been routed onto secondary roads that collapsed under their weight, causing a 2-day delay in a critical counterattack. A field hospital was set up in a known flood zone. The chaos was attributed to simple snafu, situation normal, all fucked up. A frustrating but common reality of military bureaucracy. But McMillan couldn't shake the feeling of calculated menace. He noticed an inexplicable consistency in the failures. They were always focused on critical logistical nodes, and the false orders always bore the same subtle, almost imperceptible flaw: a misplaced comma, a slightly non-standard form number. The man he met at Delta 9, the one who looked so perfectly American, had pronounced the word aluminum with an almost undetectable, elongated Italian vowel sound, al-umi-num. The paranoia began to spread, a whispering sickness through the engineering corps. MPs began setting up impromptu checkpoints, but asking about state capitals or baseball was too simple. The enemy was too well briefed. They needed a test of pure unconscious culture, something that couldn't be memorized from a German handbook. Macmillan, huddled in a freezing tent with his men, contemplating the absurdity of the entire situation, fighting a hidden war against ghosts wearing their boots, had an epiphany. It was a simple, quintessential taste of home. The enemy could mimic their uniforms, they could learn their slang, but could they instinctively understand the subtle, greasy truth of American popular food? The stage is set for a duel of wits, not rifles. The Americans have a new weapon against deception, one born of the diner counter, not the factory floor. But will it work against a fanatical enemy who knows they will be shot as spies if caught? If you're finding this deep dive into the hidden battles of YouTube compelling, remember to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. It's the best way to support historically accurate, high-quality war documentary content. The counter-espionage war is often fought with files, not firearms. It is a grueling mental grind, a slow, methodical attempt to impose order on the intrinsic chaos of the front lines. The first vital task for Macmillan and his newly assembled counterintelligence task force, unofficially dubbed Operation Gut Check, was to pinpoint the enemy's true objective. Their target was not the destruction of a single bridge, but the systematic erosion of trust and efficiency within the supply chain. The infiltrators were strategically placed to sow confusion regarding troop movements and maintenance schedules. In the lexicon of strategy, they were a form of sophisticated delaying action, slowing the entire Allied advance by increments. Historical perspective. Quote 2. Axis engineer. We were not asked to be heroes with guns. We were asked to be a splinter in the American mind, to make them question the signature on the order, the accent of the man who gave it. The American war machine is a wonder of industry, a monster fed by supplies. My job was not to kill the monster, but to put sand in its fuel lines. The Americans value their freedom and their comfort above all. We were trained to exploit their cultural weaknesses, their dependence on home. It was terrifying, yes, but it was our final logical act of war. Attributed to a captured engineer, Battaglione d'Assalto, February 1944. The German intelligence Abwehr training given to these select Italian commandos was incredibly detailed. They were provided with specific cultural primers covering everything from the 1943 World Series results, Yankees defeating the Cardinals, to the popular nicknames for different U.S. armored vehicles. A Sherman was a Ronson, the M10 tank destroyer was a Wolverine. Linguistically, they focused on mastering the flat, non-rhotic accents of the American Midwest and Northeast. The highest-ranking captured infiltrator was found carrying a pocket-sized manual listing key American slang and euphemisms, including the difference between "I reckon" and "I suppose." However, no amount of book knowledge could replicate a lifetime of subconscious cultural immersion. Macmillan's epiphany was about the hot dog. He recognized that the perfect cultural test needed to be multi-layered and require instantaneous, unscripted responses. It had to be about preference, not fact. The test, as he devised it, had 3 parts. 1. The delivery. Do you want that boiled, grilled, or charred? A real New Yorker or Chicagoan has a strong immediate preference. An infiltrator has to process and choose a safe answer. 2. The condiment. What kind of mustard? Yellow, Dijon, or the sweet stuff? Mustard is a complex regional choice. The safe choice, yellow, is a tell in itself if stated too quickly. 3. The ketchup trap. Ketchup, right? The ultimate trap. In many regions, putting ketchup on a hot dog after the age of 12 is considered a culinary atrocity. A true GI would recoil or immediately clarify. An infiltrator would likely accept it as the universal safe source. The atmosphere in the camps transformed. The distrust had been corrosive. Now it had a focus. MPs at the rear checkpoints, previously asking awkward, easily memorized trivia questions, were now tasked with setting up impromptu morale stands, a field kitchen disguised as a test facility, complete with freshly prepared hot dogs and a bewildering array of authentic and bizarre condiments. The infiltrators, emboldened by their initial successes and aware of the massive pressure on the Gustav line, were planning their most audacious sabotage yet, the destruction of the Pisa-Florence rail junction, a critical choke point for all heavy Allied armor. To achieve this, a specialized team of infiltrators disguised as U.S. Army railway engineers had to move through 3 high-security checkpoints. Checkpoint Gamma 5. The first team of 3 engineers passed with ease, answering questions about the engine displacement of a GMC CCKW truck and the correct procedure for laying a standard-gauge track. They were confident, almost arrogant. They reached the second line, a routine MP patrol under the command of Sergeant Macmillan, armed not with carbines, but with a mobile kitchen and a steaming pot of franks. The Italian commander of the infiltration unit, a former civil engineer from Milan named Lieutenant Moretti, known as Sergeant Miller in his U.S. uniform, watched the encounter from a distance. Moretti was a fanatic, but he was also a professional. He had studied American culture for months. Baseball, easy, Hollywood, simple. But a hot dog? He felt a sudden, sickening doubt. It was the triviality of the question, the unexpected normalcy, that terrified him. The first engineer, Private Ricci, walked up. A gruff MP offered him a hot dog. "Need some mustard, buddy?" the MP asked. Ricci, having been taught that mustard was the only condiment besides relish, replied instantly, "Yeah, yellow mustard." The MP nodded. Correct, but too quick. Then came the trap. "And ketchup? Gotta have the ketchup, right?" Ricci, trying to be an easygoing American, smiled and said, "Sure, put it on." The MP paused, staring at the perfectly ordinary Italian man in the perfectly ordinary U.S. uniform. The absence of offense, the acceptance of the heresy, was the giveaway. The hot dog test had found its first victim. January 1944, checkpoint Gamma 5, outside Florence, Italy. The sudden shift in the air was palpable. It wasn't the crack of a rifle, but the cold silence of recognition. The MP, a stocky man named Corporal Rodriguez, had just seen a ghost confirm its own unreality. The man in front of him, Private Ricci, had accepted ketchup on a hot dog without a flinch. No scoff, no mild protest, no regional defense, just an easy, practiced smile. Corporal Rodriguez dropped his hand from the bottle. "That's good, Private. Just one last thing." This was the moment of truth. The captured Axis personnel, particularly spies, were instructed to maintain their cover until physical contact or an impossible question. Rodriguez had to proceed without creating a shootout that would alert the other infiltrators. "I've got 3 kinds of relish here," Rodriguez continued, his voice neutral. "Sweet, dill, and a third one." "What's that third kind called? The one they only make in Chicago?" Ricci faltered. His training manual listed sweet and dill as the main variants. He racked his brain. Chicago was famous for its giardiniera, a spicy vegetable mix, but not a relish. The question was a total fabrication, designed to expose the gap in his cultural knowledge. The truth was, the third jar contained ordinary, inferior Italian-made pickled cucumbers. Ricci's eyes darted left, then right. In that fraction of a second, the pretense evaporated. The engineer was gone. The fanatical Italian commando remained. Historical perspective. Quote, 3. Allied soldier. We saw the change in his eyes. It was like a switch flipped. The smile was replaced by this absolute, dead calm certainty that he was caught and he was going to die. That's what confirmed it. A real GI would have just said, "I don't know, what the hell is it?" An enemy agent knows that any deviation from the script means the firing squad. Corporal Pete Rodriguez, 71st MP Battalion, post-war interview. Rodriguez snapped the command, not in English, but in the most common German phrase he knew, "Hände hoch," hands up. It was a final theatrical flourish, a psychological jolt. The subsequent capture of Private Ricci was swift and violent, but silent. He was immediately gagged and secured. With Ricci secured, Macmillan's team had operational intelligence. The remaining 2 men of Ricci's infiltration team, Sergeant Miller, Moretti, and Prefect Greco, Rossetti, were still approaching. They had to be caught before they reached the rail yard, where their micro-sabotage, planting undetectable delayed-action explosives on key switch points, would paralyze the entire Allied logistics network north of Rome for weeks. The trap was reset. Macmillan ordered his men to change the physical setting of the checkpoint. The table was moved 20 feet back. A new, nervous MP took Rodriguez's place. As Moretti and Rossetti drove up in their jeep, Moretti immediately noticed the change in the barrier position. Why move the table, he wondered. A small flicker of caution. The new MP, looking appropriately bored, offered Rossetti the same culinary challenge. "Hey, need a dog buddy? Grilled, boiled, or charred? My preference is grilled, less like a rubber band." Rossetti, who had watched Ricci pass the first time, knew the test was coming. He answered perfectly. "Grilled, of course." "Boiled dogs are for amateurs." The MP nodded, his eyes wide. Rossetti felt a surge of triumph. The condiment test. Mustard. Yellow, Dijon, or sweet? Yellow, just the yellow. Rossetti was cool. He had done it. The ketchup trap. Perfect. You'll want the ketchup then, right? Good dollop. And here Rossetti made the small fatal error of overcompensation. Knowing the cultural sensitivity, he wanted to sound more American, more offended. "Ketchup? On a hot dog? Are you a commie?" "No." The MP froze. The correct dismissive American response would have been an easy, "Nah, skip it," or a simple, "Are you kidding?" The phrase, "Are you a commie?" was too dramatic, too politically charged for a casual food joke, a phrase that betrayed an effort to sound Hollywood American, not real American. Moretti, still in the jeep, saw the tension in the MP's shoulders. He knew. His heart hammered against his ribs. The mission was blown. His life and the life of his comrade was now measured in seconds. Moretti slammed the jeep into reverse. He knew the risk. Capture meant execution. The Geneva Convention protected soldiers, but spies in enemy uniform were non-combatants and could be shot. The terror of this certainty was a physical weight. As the jeep spun, machine gun fire erupted from the hidden positions Macmillan had established. Rossetti, standing next to the hot dog stand, was cut down instantly. Moretti fought on for 3 harrowing minutes, driving the jeep into the nearby woods, only to be captured an hour later by a larger patrol, huddled in a ditch, his pristine U.S. Army uniform now torn and caked with mud. The hot dog test wasn't a military secret. It was a cultural litmus test. Its success proved that the enemy's most sophisticated camouflage was ultimately undone by a simple, greasy piece of Americana. Late January 1944. 5th Army Intelligence Center, Naples. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the implications were just beginning to sink in. The chaos attributed to simple GI incompetence was, in fact, the calculated result of a specialized sabotage campaign. The captured infiltrators, Lieutenant Moretti and the remnants of his unit, provided crucial intelligence under interrogation. Moretti was a professional, not a zealot. He broke not from torture, but from the realization of how close he'd come. He detailed their operational goals, not to win a battle, but to delay the war by 60 days. 60 days to allow the Germans to complete their new generation of self-propelled guns. 60 days to harden the defenses of the Gothic Line. It was a race against the American assembly line, and he almost succeeded. Major Richard O'Connell, 5th Army Interrogation Unit, post-war memoir. Moretti's revelation shifted the focus of Allied command from tactical defense to strategic logistics. The infiltrators were fighting a proxy war for the Axis's flagging industrial capacity. Consider the numbers. In 1944, the US was producing approximately 3,500 new tactical aircraft per month. German production of the formidable Tiger II heavy tank was struggling to reach 80 units per month. The Allies needed to move an average of 30,000 tons of supplies per day through southern Italy. Every successful act of micro-sabotage, a contaminated fuel depot, a misdirected convoy, a deliberately weakened bridge, forced the diversion of US industrial power away from the front and back into repair. A damaged bridge, meant to hold a 40-ton Sherman, required thousands of man-hours and hundreds of tons of replacement steel, all sourced from the US, shipped across the U-boat-infested Atlantic. The irony deepens. The Axis could not outproduce the Allies, so they attempted to destroy the flow of that production, using deception as their most cost-effective weapon. The interrogations revealed the sophistication of the infiltration training. They studied the specific non-military details that betray cultural origin. Pacing, the way Americans stood, with a relaxed, slightly slouched posture, distinct from the rigid, attention-focused stance of European military training. The M1 Garand, the unique metallic ping of the M1 rifle's clip being ejected. The infiltrators were trained to instantly recognize the sound, but could not simulate the casual, proprietary way a GI handled his primary weapon. Engineering slang. The difference between calling a blueprint a plan, European, and a drawing, common US engineering vernacular. But it was the hot dog, the simple cultural marker, that remained the unscripted variable. The concept of the hot dog test spread virally among US forces in Italy, a dark running joke that served a critical military purpose. Checkpoints were standardized, MPs were given refresher courses on American state capitals and sports statistics, but the final definitive test was always something simple: a piece of food, a line from a popular song, or a question about a local baseball team. The discovery had an immediate and profound effect. The Fifth Army began a massive, localized security sweep, clearing the rear areas of the remaining infiltrators and disrupting their networks of sympathizers. The frequency of unexplained logistical failures plummeted. Bridges stopped collapsing mysteriously. Fuel dumps ran clean. The chaos and paranoia that had begun to cripple the supply lines were replaced by a newfound, if grim, vigilance. Soldiers started talking to one another again, not with suspicion, but with a deeper sense of camaraderie, built on shared cultural anchors, the knowledge that they all knew ketchup was a crime on a hot dog. The story of the Italian infiltrators and the hot dog test became an urban legend in the US Army, a grim, humorous tale passed from unit to unit. It was a testament to the fact that in a war defined by machines and mountains, the true, unbreakable core of an army lay in its shared culture and its instinctual humanity. European theater, summer 1944, post-D-Day landscape. The hot dog test and the subsequent intelligence from Moretti did more than just save a few supply routes in Italy. It provided a vital operational blueprint for security throughout the Allied campaigns. As the massive forces prepared for and executed the invasion of Normandy, the lessons learned in the Apennines were applied universally. The German High Command, notably through Otto Skorzeny during the planning for the Battle of the Bulges Operation Greif, would later employ a similar strategy of infiltration in US uniforms, aiming for the same goal: confusion and logistical collapse. But the Americans were ready. The paranoia of '44, first nurtured by the Italian infiltrators, had hardened into organized vigilance. The test questions in the Ardennes would shift from hot dogs to the starting lineup of the Brooklyn Dodgers, but the principle remained the same: find the crack in the cultural facade. The infiltration campaign's ultimate failure lay in its misjudgment of the American character. The Axis assumed that American culture was superficial and easily mimicked. They learned the slogans but not the soul. They learned the rules but not the exceptions. We were so focused on the technology of war, the altitude of the P-51, the caliber of the Tiger, that we sometimes forgot the simple facts of human life. The hot dog test was history's way of reminding us that war is not just a calculation of steel and fuel, it is a clash of cultures. The German and Italian soldiers were disciplined, yes, but they were trained to obey. The American soldier, even in a uniform, retained a core of individualism, a willingness to question a bad order, or in this case, a bad condiment. That instinct, that freedom to say, "No, that's wrong," was our greatest security measure. Dr. Eleanor Vance, post-war cultural historian. The human cost, however, was not trivial. The incident fueled deep-seated paranoia, leading to numerous instances where innocent GIs were detained, interrogated, and sometimes even physically harmed simply for having a regional accent, a slight tan, or an unfamiliar piece of equipment. The fear of the enemy within was a psychological casualty of this particular hidden battle. The military had to work to quell the resulting wave of aggressive suspicion, emphasizing that while vigilance was necessary, the majority of men in US uniform were Americans. The hot dog test remains a powerful, if bizarre, symbol of the multifaceted nature of World War II. It was a contest of ingenuity, where the tools of espionage were not hidden radios or dead drops, but a roadside food stand and a bottle of bright red sauce. The captured Italian infiltrators, tried as spies, met the expected fate, executed for their actions while in disguise. Their mission, to cripple the Allied advance for 60 days, failed. By the summer of 1944, The combined might of Allied industrial production and logistical flow was overwhelming the German lines in both Italy and France. The war was won, block by block, bridge by bridge, and yes, hot dog by hot dog. The battle for Italy was a grinding, brutal affair, but it also became the proving ground for the psychological security necessary for the final victory. The GI on the line was not just fighting the enemy in front of him, he was fighting the invisible enemy who tried to become him. And in the end, it was the simple, unmistakable taste of home that provided the ultimate defense. The stories of the Second World War are endless, often hidden beneath layers of official history. If you want to keep exploring the precise high-stakes narratives of technology, strategy, and the human drama behind the front lines, ensure you subscribe and leave a comment below. What hidden war story should we uncover next?